Hi, and welcome to another QwikTouchPro video. In this video, we're going to be making a customer display, which you could use to display information from the current sales invoicing keystroke to your customer. So as you're bringing up sales, they can see the items that are being rung up. You can also show them advertising. And the first thing we need to do to make this work is we need to go into keystroke, and we need to make sure that the data port is enabled. And we do that under the transaction parameters data port. And the way this works is every time one of these checkpoints happens, so every time when a customer is selected or at each line item entry, keystroke goes through and updates this text file, this trn1 kfo1, or depending on your machine number, so trn1, 2, whatever. It updates that text file with the current information about the sales invoice. So for this video, we just want to make sure we have a check in all these boxes, which means anytime one of these happens, we're going to go out and update that text file, and then QwikTouchPro can update the customer display. And that's fine. We'll leave the data directory alone. Export file name is fine. We just want to make a note it's trn1, machine name KFO, and we'll say OK. And that is all the setup we need to do in keystroke. We can minimize that. And now we can go into the QwikTouchPro editor. And we'll create our new template for our customer display. 10 by 7 sounds good. Full screen's fine. Normally you'd probably run this on monitor 2. For the purpose of this video, we're going to put it on monitor 1 so we can see keystroke alongside of it as we're bringing up sales. Primary is fine. We'll leave the rest of those options. And we'll say OK. And we'll go up and save our template. Save as customer display. Okay. I spelled all that right? Yep. So there's our template. So before we can start adding our customer display, we need to create a data source that tells QwikTouchPro how to work with that TRN KFO file that keystroke is creating. So we do that under the Data tab, under the Data Sources group, and we're going to choose New Data Source. And we're going to change our type from SQL Server to Keystroke Data Port, and make sure you get Data Port, not Customer Display. Realize that sounds confusing. We'll choose Keystroke Data Port. Keystroke data port source, we need to browse that to a file, and that, if you look down in the corner here, it's looking for that KFO file that keystroke is creating, and that gets created in our keystroke data folder, which in this case is tutor. We go into tutor, we see trn1 KFO. It was modified November 8th at 8:23 p.m., so just a few minutes ago, so we know that's the file we're looking for. And we'll say OK. Poll every second we'll leave, and when we hit create here, it's just going to prompt us to save this configuration file, and we'll save it as keystroke data port, and we'll say OK. Add this to the active template, we'll say no. So like I mentioned, instead of our customer display taking the entire template, we're going to leave a little room over here for keystroke so we can ring up a few sales. So let's get started. I'm going to drag a border on here, and this is just going to be a background, like I say, to kind of separate keystroke from our customer display. And let's see what do we want to put on here. Let's open keystroke back up. So the first thing we'd like to see is probably the customer name up at the top. So we'll minimize keystroke, go back to the editor, and we'll grab a text control, drag it onto the canvas, line it up here where we want the customer name to go. And we can't just type customer name in here. We need the actual customer name from the data port. And to do that, we're going to go to the Data tab, Data Binding. And this, what we're going to do here is we're going to bind the text of this control to the customer name in the keystroke data port. And the way we do that is under data source, and we don't have any on our template yet, so we'll have to browse for one. Go over here, browse for data source, and there's that keystroke data port file that we created just a few minutes ago, and we'll choose open. And what that does is populate our data path drop down here with all the fields that are available in the keystroke data port, and there are a ton. I encourage you to look at that file, that keystroke data trn1 KFO file. Open that up in a text editor, and you can see all the possible fields that you can drag onto your customer display here. For now, I think we just want customer business name, and we still have our text control selected, and we're going to hit apply, and that applies that binding to this text. You can see it changed it to customer business name, although we can't read it because the text is a little big. So we'll come over and adjust the font size a little bigger, and maybe we'll make that bold, left justify, and we'll make it a little smaller. And if we preview this template now, open up our keystroke, shrink our window. If we change the customer on our invoice now with an insert, and we go to Ann's Big Store, for example, you can see that our keystroke data port file immediately updates with the new customer information. If we change the customer again, come down to Health Food Center, same thing. That label will always show us now whoever the current customer in sales invoice is. If we clear this transaction, drops to cash. So the next thing we're going to add, let's add a total down here at the bottom. So let's close QwikTouchPro, go back into the editor. And to do the total, we're going to do a plain text control, and we're going to do a label first, just something to tell us total that we're looking at. That's just going to sit down here. And let's get a little fancy here. Let's put the total inside a box. Maybe make the border a little thick on that. And now we're going to drag a plain text control onto this. And this is going to be the actual total from the invoice. So we're going to do this just like we did the customer business name. We're going to highlight the text. We're going to go into the data tab. We're going to go to data binding group. Our data source is still the data port. That's fine. We're going to change the data path from customer business name to amount due. Just going to track down and find it. Format. Amount due comes from the data port as, for example, 7.2, and we would rather format that as $7.20, and that's where this format comes in. And there'll be a blog post on this later, but for now we're just going to do curly bracket 0:C for currency, and exit our curly bracket there, and we'll hit apply, and you can see that changed our text down here to amount due. One thing I like to do when I'm laying these out is change that to put text in there, whatever I think that text is going to be in production here. So I think, for example, $99,999.99 maybe is the biggest total we're ever going to see in that box. So I just want to know what that's going to look like. So we'll make it bold, and we can see maybe we can make that font a little bigger now. And if we preview our template, you'll see as we add some line items, our total will update just like Keystrokes is updating. If we clear the transaction, it goes away. So, there we go. The next thing we're going to want to add is some line items. You can add more labels on your own. Like I say, you can add subtotal, miscellaneous, tax loops, tax districts, anything you see. And again, look in that TRN KFO file to get an idea of what all you can put on there. So let's exit QwikTouchPro. We'll go back into the editor. And now for the line items, we can't just do a label like we did the customer business name. There was one customer business name, there's one total, but there could be many line items, there could be no line items. So to represent our line items, we're going to come down here under Advanced Control, and we're going to choose Data Grid. We'll drag that onto the canvas, and we get our Data Grid Properties window here. And the first thing it wants us to do is choose a data source for this data grid, and we'll browse out, and there's our keystroke data port file again. That's great. We'll choose Open. We'll come back to the rest of those options for now. Source columns. We want to add a column for description. So let's find description off the list. And again, this list just contains all the available options from the keystroke data port line items, which is not the same as the invoice data. So we've got description, header. We can leave as descriptions fine. We don't need to format this. Header text center's fine. Let's left justify the text, the description. Instead of specifying a width, we're going to do fill width, which will make the description column as wide as, takes all the available space. So as you resize your data control there, your data grid, the description column will shrink and grow. And we're also going to wrap the cell text. If you make the column too small, or if the text in it's too big, we'll drop it to another line, and we'll choose Add. And we can see we have our description under our columns now, and let's just take a look at that. So here we go. We have our data grid now shows a description column with the header, and we have the two items that are on our current keystroke sales invoice here. And as we resize our data grid, a description column resizes with it, which you can see as we shrink it down, the text starts to drop to 2 lines. So we'll just drag our data grid over here where we want it. And do a little formatting to the data grid, of course. We can come up here and give it a little border thickness. We could set a background color for it, or we could even come in and set a background image. Maybe we want to set that to our logo. So when between sales, or when the sales invoice is empty, you'll see your splash screen sitting there for advertising. And now we want to add a couple more columns. We've got description. See, we could add quantity, price, and amount. Amount being quantity times price. So let's go back into the editor. And with our data grid highlighted, we're going to go under Data Controls, Data Grid Group, Configure. And you can see this is just where we left it. We have our data source still. We have our description column we already added. And now we're going to add our quantity column, which is quantity shipped. And instead of a header of quantity shipped, which is kind of wordy, we're going to do QTY. We don't need to format this. We'll still align that center. Let's make the text on this right. Now the width of the quantity we do want to specify. You could leave this as 0 and the column will size with the data, so the more data that's in there, the wider the column will get, which is fine except in the data port or customer display, for example. Then when you clear your transaction, the quantity column shrinks up to nothing. As you add items, it'll grow and shrink. So we really want to make it cleaner. We really want to specify the width, and I'm just going to call it 65, and that does line up. Each column is 100, so this will be a little over half a column wide. And you can just kind of play with those to see what size you like, obviously. We're not going to fill width. We're not going to wrap any of the text. And we're going to say add. We also want to add our list price, I believe. And that's our price. So we'll rename it to price. We're back to our string format here. We don't want 7.2. We want dollar signs and stuff. So we're going to put our curly bracket 0, C for currency, curly bracket. Again, center right, that's fine. List price is quite a bit bigger than quantity, so let's make that column 125. Still don't want any fills. We'll hit add, and you can see description, quantity, price. And the next thing we want is list price extension, which is the price times quantity, which we're going to call amount. And we'll go in and format that same way as currency. Center right, 125, that's all still fine. And we'll say add. And now when we click OK, we'll see we have a description column, a quantity column, a price column, and an amount column. You can see though that I didn't get the quantity column quite wide enough. The Y is getting cut off a little bit there. So to fix that, we select our data grid, go under data controls, go back into configure. We can come down here and highlight our quantity column and then choose our edit icon and just go up and change the width to maybe 75. And be sure anytime you do an update, when you're editing these, you have to hit update. If you just close this window, your changes are going to be lost. You have to hit update and then hit OK. And now you can see quantity fits a little better in there. And if we preview this template again, clear our transaction, you can see our transaction clears. As we add items, they show up on our list. There we go. So let's go back into the QwikTouchPro editor and let's format the data grid a little bit. And here we're going to be formatting the header, the row, the alternating row. And we do all that under the data controls tab, under the data grid group. And data grid, row color, and the row text groups all pertain to the data grid here. So let's start at the top. We'll do selection mode. Right now we're set to all. Our other options are all rows, which is everything but the header. We have header, which is just the header, obviously. We have row, and we have alternating row. So this is a row, that's an alternating row, row, alternating row. So you can change those independently. So, for example, if we wanted to change the header color, maybe we want to make it a little blue. And we could change our font color then to be white. And we could make the text bold, or the font bold. And if we wanted to maybe make our alternating row a different color as well, we can come under the row color, and let's just make it a light gray maybe. How about a lighter gray? There we go. And it's kind of hard to see there, but you've got white and then light gray for your alternating row. So that's just how you select which part of the data grid you want to work with. We have grid lines, which is currently set to all. We could set that to none. We could set that to horizontal or vertical, kind of like horizontal here. So we'll leave it at that. Row color and text color, we covered all of that. The background of the row and the text of the row. We could also change the font, which we're not going to do here. But we do want to change the font size. The font's a little bigger than it needs to be. We need a little more room here. So we want to make sure before we start changing the font size, though, that we select all and not just the alternating row. And let's drag the font down a little bit. And just get it all a little smaller. That looks fine. And now we could even come back in here afterwards and highlight the header row and make just the header a little bigger. And let's go back and select all again. The other thing I'm going to change here is the padding, which is the space between the rows. And you'll see as we shrink that down, it just tightens everything up. If we make it bigger, adds lots of space. So we just want to shrink that down a little bit to whatever looks good to you. And that looks good to me. So let's preview our template one last time. Clear our transaction. And again, you can see as you ring up your sales, if we do 10 Frisbees, we can see that our price and our amount, everything lines up, our totals where it needs to be, customer where it needs to be, and that's it. And that concludes our video. As always, thanks for watching.